So I couldn't help but be struck by and alarmed by the great conceptual unclarity of the last recording. We have to do. Let's do just a formal sketch, as it were, of the concept of Da-sein, which in itself won't do much, but it's just like it will help us in a way to know because we have this problem of the incoherentness of our thinking, because we have a problem hovering around anything we say somehow doesn't transmit the whole of our Da-sein or our thinking. The problems in that I was mentioning about the Platonic dialogue with the sophists and the problem they're raising about speech and what's behind speech and the intention of speech and so on. Okay, let's go to the simple rendering of Da-sein. What Da-sein means in a formal sense can be given out of Hegel. So Hegel says, and I give reference to Heidegger's seminar on Heraclitus, if anybody wants to see him telling the student how to think about it. I think he references the Cartesian version of it, but it doesn't really matter here. We're just making a little sketch just to give us some very basic orientation, as it were, to what we're talking about. So Hegel says there's no subject without an object, there's no object without a subject. So what Heidegger does is he regards that there has to be something, a ground that both the subject and the object share. So this is why he's talking when he's, the way he analyzes Nietzsche is constantly in this Da-sein frame. So he speaks about that the opposition within itself, as it were, this Klein bottle type of idea. So, but the problem is, as soon as we think about it, the subject and the object are together on one ground, with the opposition within themselves, we create for ourselves an available object, as it were. We immediately slip into the object thinking. We present Da-sein as an object to ourselves. We present being as an object to ourselves. One could go further and proffer the notion that the basic whiling, just now, there's how long it takes to videograph a short stumble around in a pathetically expressionistic sketch, inadequate in every respect, but just attempting to give us a slight bit of orientation on Da-sein. So this is a whiling, just a little while. And Heidegger gives famously the example of how long it takes to smoke a pipe. That's a whiling. And out of that splits off into the two parts of Da-sein, as it were, two parts of being. That's one way to approach it. It's not perhaps get us very far, but it at least gives us a slight orientation. So the more originality we see into the problem, the more we come into this crisis of this radical questioning of all the concepts. And then you start to see things in Nietzsche, for instance, of this questioning of the Greek psychology, the Greek soul concept, for instance. It starts to float out apart, and it looks like Da-sein coming apart, like here's the body and then there's the teleological soul, or the mind, or the intentionality kind of floating apart, but it still must be part of the same being, because the mind and the body, the teleology and the experimental causality must ultimately share the same ground, but this ground cannot be either the one or the other, since they are both produced through this opposition within itself. But what's the within itself? It's that. This is why it's so difficult to grasp the question of being, because we always want to do as so Graham Harman says, thinking of German idealism, he says, and Kant and such, this kind of split between the idealism and realism in that sense. He says, we haven't gone beyond that. Well, it's very ironic, because he spent his whole life studying Heidegger, and he didn't realize that's what Heidegger did. He went beyond the idealism and the realism. That's the whole content of Heidegger's entire oeuvre. Okay, let's leave it at that. And I make one more comment, is that it's very interesting thinking about what draws me to, especially aside for the other reasons of everything that I've learned from Strauss, what I find very supportive in his concept of the citizen's understanding is that it's thought from within a kind of confrontation, a lifelong confrontation, both with historicism and with Heidegger, who he holds in such a high regard. And it's what's different about the citizen's understanding to the other concepts of common sense is the citizen's understanding is thought in the context of the whole Western tradition, which it then attempts to hold back. It attempts to show that this is still cogent in a similar way that Heidegger attempts to show that the Da-sein concept is cogent in his struggles with Nietzsche. Okay, let's leave it at that for just a second.